Choux pastry, like a choux. If you were gonna learn one type of pastry that you could whip out for special occasions, I would recommend choux pastry, just for the sheer versatility of this dough. Once you nail the dough, all you have to do is pick a cooking method. And there are some people that say that it is notoriously difficult to make choux pastry. And you know what? That's what I'm here for, is to make it simple and easy. It's really not that hard. Everything you see in this video is gonna be made from the same exact dough. Let's get into it.
I know I was just talking about choux pastry, but the first thing I'm actually going to show you is pastry cream. So in this bowl, I have egg yolks, sugar, cornstarch, and vanilla bean paste. I'm going to whisk that until it's a very thick paste. And then I'm going to slowly stream in very hot milk. This is called tempering. It's so the egg yolks don't scramble when we go to cook it more. Once the contents of the bowl are nice and hot, we're going to put it back into the pot. We're going to bring it over to the stove, and then we're going to cook it more. And we're just going to go on medium-low heat, and we're going to stir it constantly, making sure that it doesn't overcook and scramble. Now, I would like to mention that pastry cream is extremely versatile. You can add all kinds of flavorings to this, like passion fruit or citrus or matcha or chocolate. You can totally customize it to fit your mood. But anyways, we're going to cook it until it looks like a very thick pudding. And then what we're going to do is we're going to strain it, and we're going to pass it through a chinois or a fine mesh strainer, whatever you got, just to ensure that there's no lumps left behind and your pastry cream is silky and smooth. And then right at the end, while it's still hot, I'm going to whisk in some cold butter. And then once the butter is fully emulsified in there, we're going to put it into an ice bath, we're going to cool it down, and we're going to put it in the fridge with something directly on top of the pastry cream so it doesn't form a skin. And this can be made in advance, 2 to 3 days in advance. So you can make your pastry cream on one day, and then you can make your choux dough on another day, and it makes it a lot less daunting. And then when the day comes that you actually want to serve this stuff, you can just assemble it all together, and it's not as much of a hassle. But now that pastry cream is out of the way, we can go to the choux pastry. So we're going to do 1 cup or 235 grams of water, 6 tablespoons or 84 grams of unsalted butter, diced so it melts a little bit quicker, 2 teaspoons or 8 grams of sugar, and 1/2 teaspoon or 2 grams of kosher salt. We're going to bring that over to the stove, and then once all the butter is melted and it is at a boil, we're going to turn off the heat and add all the flour at once, which is 1 cup or 128 grams. Don't worry about lumps, just use your spatula to flatten it out just like I did there. And then once it comes together, we're going to turn the heat back on to medium-low, and we're going to cook this. Now, the reason we do this is to gelatinize the flour, and the best way to know when it's done is just to use a thermometer. We're aiming between 165 Fahrenheit and 180 Fahrenheit. Now, you can go ahead and put that in the bowl of your stand mixer and let it cool down for 2 to 3 minutes before we move on to the next step, which is going to be adding our eggs, and we're going to add them one at a time. Now, you really have to let it fully emulsify in there before adding the next one. It's going to look broken, and it's going to look weird, but it will come back together into an emulsified dough, which would be when you add your next egg, and repeat the process until all of your eggs are incorporated. And then when you're done, your dough should be silky and smooth and shiny, and it should make this V. This is a very old school method to know when your dough is ready. Now at this point, I like to put my dough into a piping bag and then let it rest for 1 to 2 hours. And the reason I do it in the piping bag is so that it doesn't get a skin. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you can make this dough ahead of time, around 2 to 3 days ahead of time. And then just a small trick is that if you get it in the piping bag and use a bench scraper, you can scrape it all to the front, making sure that it's all in one place. Just a little bit neater and cleaner. And then whenever you're ready, go ahead and pipe it out by doing a little swirl at the end onto parchment paper or a silpat. Now, if your piping skills aren't the best and you have these little tips at the end, not to worry, just get your finger wet and tap them down. Now at this point, you can brush them with egg wash and go right into the oven, but what I'm going to do is do a crackling, which is incredibly easy, and it makes your choux buns look that much better. And the recipe couldn't be easier as well. It's just equal parts by weight, soft butter, light brown sugar, and flour. So just mix the soft butter with your light brown sugar, and then go ahead and add your flour, and then mix that with your spatula. And then once it starts to come together into a shaggy dough, I just like to use my hands and press it into itself. You're not trying to knead it and develop gluten, but just bring it together. Once it resembles a dough, we're going to put this on a piece of parchment paper. We're going to cover it up with another piece of parchment paper, and we're going to roll it out nice and thin. Do not worry, it will peel right off. Also, don't worry about the shape. If it's a little bit oblong, that's fine. As long as it's the same thickness all the way around, that's all that matters. Once it's rolled out, I'm going to put it onto a sheet tray so I can move it around and it stays nice and flat, and I'm going to go into the freezer. And then once it's frozen, you can go ahead and use a ring cutter to punch out circles of this dough. You want it to be a little bit larger than the choux pastry you're going to pipe out. Now, this craquelin is 1/3 fat, so it will come to room temperature and melt very quickly. So just keep them in the fridge until you're ready. And now you're going to bake these in the oven at 375 degrees Fahrenheit for around 30 minutes. And the times and temperatures for all of this stuff and the recipe will be in the description, guys. guys. Now, if you decide to go with no crackling, these are gonna be your little choux pastries. Now, the easiest filling for this is just gonna be whipped cream, and then you can pipe it in there and you'll have a little profiterole, top it with some powdered sugar or a chocolate drizzle, whatever you want, but it's really fast, really simple. Now for the choux bun with the craquelin, I'm going to pipe it with that pastry cream that we made earlier, and then I'm going to show you the inside. It should be nice and hollow. Now the other alternative would just be to cut it in half horizontally, and you can pipe it in there and make a little sandwich. I kind of like just piping the filling inside of it because it's kind of fun. You never know what the filling is going to be, especially if people get really creative with the flavors. I could have actually been a little bit more aggressive with the whipped cream in that first one, but it's okay. And you know your pastry cream is good if it doesn't ooze out and run. It just holds its shape after I cut it in half like that. The next one we're going to do, just grab yourself a small square of oiled parchment paper and we're going to pipe a little circle on there. Now you probably already know what this is going to be. We're going to make a cruller donut. I would recommend piping them all out onto separate pieces of parchment paper and then moving forward and frying them. But just go ahead and drop them in there at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. With the parchment on, it'll slip right off. Now go ahead and fry them around 3 minutes per side until they're a deep golden brown. If you don't fry them long enough, they will deflate when you take them out of the oil. They look like little flat tires. It's really no fun. Now to finish them, you can do a glaze or an icing, but I actually have this vanilla sugar. I take scraped vanilla beans and I put them in sugar and it makes them super fragrant and, well, taste like vanilla. Give them a quick toss and then there you have a cruller donut. Now the inside should be a nice open fluffy structure. And incidentally, if you pipe the dough directly into the oil and fry them the exact same way, but then you toss them in cinnamon sugar, you just made yourself some churros. Last, I'm going to make chocolate eclairs. You can use a open star tip or a round tip for this. Now, this one I will admit is a little bit fiddly, but you're going to pipe them in a straight line. You can use a piece of parchment with a line drawn onto it for reference if you really need it. And if you get a little tail, not to worry, you can just tap it with a wet finger, it'll go away. And then we're going to brush it with egg wash. And while those go in the oven, I'm going to make a chocolate ganache. So for the ganache, I'm going to do 6 ounces of chocolate chips and 6 ounces of heavy cream that was just barely brought to a boil. Let the chocolate sit in the hot cream for a few minutes before you start stirring. It's going to look messy, it's going to look a little weird and broken, but it will come back together and that will yield you a very nice, smooth chocolate ganache. Once the eclairs are cooked and cooled, I'm going to use this piping tip to pipe the eclairs full of the pastry cream that I made. And then once they're full of the pastry cream, I'm going to dunk them in the chocolate ganache that I made. And there is a basic chocolate eclair. Now again, you can totally customize the flavors on all of these things, but once I cut it in half, you can see that the choux pastry has been dried out sufficiently and is nice and hollow inside, leaving plenty of room for whatever filling you decide to use, and the only acceptable way to eat this is in as few bites as possible. Now, there are also savory applications for choux pastry. If you start adding a little bit of cheese to your dough, and here I'm adding my eggs which were blended with herbs, and then pipe it directly into simmering salted water, you will make Parisian gnocchi. The full recipe for this one is actually on my Instagram or my TikTok.
Thank you for watching all the way until the end if you're still here. If you liked the video, make sure you leave a thumbs up. It really does help. And as always, when in doubt, end the video.